আমরা কি শুরু করবো এবার জানাজা? না স্যার, আপনার আওয়াজ কিন্তু ক্লিয়ার আসছে না। হ্যাঁ স্যার, আসছে, আওয়াজ আসছে।
আচ্ছা, ওয়েলকাম প্রফেসর সৈয়দ আলী নাদিম রেজাভি, Professor Syed Ali Nadim Javi, Professor, Center of Advanced Study Department. He also holds position of Chairman and Coordinator, Center of Advanced Study in History, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh, and Coordinator Musa Dakri Museum, Aligarh Muslim University.
শুভ সন্ধ্যা। উপস্থিত সকল সুধীবৃন্দকে জানাই পশ্চিমবঙ্গ ইতিহাস সংসদ সোসাইটি কলকাতার যৌথ উদ্যোগে আয়োজিত অধ্যাপক অনিরুদ্ধ রায় তৃতীয় স্মারক বক্তৃতার আপনাদের সকলকে স্বাগত। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, শোনা যাচ্ছে।
হ্যালো,
হ্যাঁ শোনা যাচ্ছে।
সুলগ্না সোম,
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ শোনা যাচ্ছে।
Am I audible? আমি কি আমাকে শোনা যাচ্ছে?
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ শোনা যাচ্ছে। আমি পরিচয় পর্ব ছেড়ে ফেলি। আমাদের মধ্যে উপস্থিত
our beloved President, Professor Ranjit Sen, who is now very busy for medical checkup. In his absence here, I will preside over the Professor Aniruddha Rai Memorial Lecture today. On behalf of Pashchimbongo Itihas Sangsad,
আমাদের পশ্চিমবঙ্গ ইতিহাস সংসদের সহসভাপতি আচ্ছা সুশান্ত স্যার,
Syed Ali Nadim of Aligarh University,
আমার কথা কি শোনা যাচ্ছে?
Good friend, and he is expert of medieval Indian history with special reference to the Mughal period in India, along with urban and social history, history of classes, cultural history of medieval India, architecture, miniature paintings and social relations, and history of Indian Shiaism, and historical and medieval Indian archaeology. Professor
আমি একটু পর্বটা করে নিই। আমাদের অধ্যাপক কৃষ্ণ দাস মহোদয়, তিনি পশ্চিমবঙ্গ ইতিহাস সংসদের সহসভাপতি। আজকে রঞ্জিত সেন মহাশয়, সভাপতি রঞ্জিত সেন মহাশয় আমাদের মধ্যে উপস্থিত নেই তার শারীরিক অসুস্থতার জন্য। তাই আজকের অনুষ্ঠানে সহসভাপতি হিসেবে সুশান্ত দাস মহাশয় তার বক্তব্য প্রদান করবেন। তাই আপনাকে আমি অনুরোধ করছি আজকের অনুষ্ঠানের জন্য আপনার বক্তব্য পেশ করুন। স্যার, আপনার মাইক বোধহয় মিউট রয়েছে।
Sayyid Ali Nadim Rejavi being invited by Paschim Bongo Itihas Sangsad in its 35th annual conference on 24th to 26th January 2019. He presided over the medieval section in this conference and presented a very exceptional, interesting paper anticipating Raja Ram Mohan Rai, Akbar and Abul Fazl on reason, rationalism and social ethics. Welcome Professor Sayyid Ali Nadim Rejavi. He is also my very good friend during sessions of Indian history many times in various universities across the country. Now, may I request Professor Nadim Rejavi to deliver his
Before that, sir,
endowment lecture on
request Professor Ashish Kumar
Memorial
Das.
Lecture.
Ashish Kumar Das
Second
মহাশয়কে আমি
Memorial Lecture.
সম্পাদক
First Memorial Lecture on Anurai delivered by Professor Ratnaboli Chatterjee. And now we are very much eager to see Nadim Rejavi. He will speak on his favorite subject, Fathpur Sikri.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So should I start?
Sir, before that, I would request.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. You may start now.
Okay. I am first of all really thankful to Paschim Banga Itihas Sansad and Asiatic Society Kolkata for providing me this honor of paying my tributes to Professor Anirudh Ray on his 3rd death anniversary through this memorial lecture. Let me at the outset point out that Professor Aniruddha was one of my reasons of contact with Kolkata and Bengal. It was he who actually introduced me to its charms as well as the larger intellectual crowd. I still remember my first interaction with him. The setting was a large, crowded room in Kurukshetra University where the proceedings of the medieval Indian section of the Indian History Congress were being held. Professor A.R. Kulkarni was presiding while I was presenting my paper on Mukarrab Khan. This stern-looking man in specs and a thick bush of curly mane was what I thought then, glaring at me with a hand raised to ask a question. With a sinking heart, I was cursing him. Doesn't he know that here is a first timer, an academic greenhorn who was presenting his first paper? But when he started speaking, he brought me at ease with his words of appreciation and encouragement. Later, he was to tell me that young scholars have to be encouraged by noticing their papers and putting up helping questions. This was in 1982, and our journey commenced, which was to continue up till his untimely death in 2018. I had seen him earlier at my department as well, while he delivered a lecture on some topic related with trade. But as a student of MA, I had actually not followed a word of his profound talk. My interactions with him grew over the years, since the Indian History Congress session in the winters of 1982. As I joined research at AMU under Professor Irfan Habib, I found him a regular visitor to Aligarh for various seminars and symposiums. Time and again, he kept tabs on my academic progress. In fact, he introduced me to Gaur and facilitated my visit to the site along with Professor Ratnabali Chatterjee, late Prateep Kumar Mitra, and Professor Sutapa Sinha. My very fond remembrance of him is from an evening at University of Gaur Banga at Malda in 2010 during a session of the Indian History Congress when he informally assembled some of us from Aligarh and started delivering an extempore lecture on Gaur. Today, I am going to speak on a topic which he kept on encouraging me to work. I mean, Fathpur Sikri. In fact, one of the chapters of his last book, Towns and Cities of Medieval India, is devoted to this theme, and where he has also critiqued my work. Let me first of all start with what was the state and its nature, which was established by Akbar. The debate of medieval Indian state had in fact started in 1357 by Zia Barni, in his Tarikh-e-Feroz Shahi and Fatwa-e-Jahandari. There had been no concept of state or of sovereignty in Islam. So Barni looked towards the Iranians and the Byzantines, where there were dynastic principles based on the law of primogeniture. In Islam, the principle was violence. The Prophet's family had been set aside and the Umayyad state formed. He also differentiated between men of high and low birth. A religious person, according to Barni, should be the ruler. Finally, in India, there being a majority of non-Muslims, according to him, Shariat would not suffice. Zawabits were needed. This is what Zia Barni had thought when he was writing his Fatwa-e-Jahandari and Tarikh-e-Feroz Shahi during the 14th century. After the establishment of the Mughal Empire by Akbar, Abul Fazl rejected the idea of Barni in entirety. In Ain-e-Akbari, Abul Fazl points out that a religious person should not be a ruler. If a ruler is religious or falls in the hands of religious, the result is intolerance, and wise men are denounced as infidels. And this is what we are seeing even today. Abul Fazl further said, while the wise would be denounced, the mischievous are groomed and nurtured. The entire notion that religion could lead to a civilized polity is to be rejected. Instead, according to Abul Fazl, there is a social contract, and thus the sovereign is responsible to all subjects. The element of divine connection is provided by the mystic Ishraqi, that is illuministic philosophy, which goes back to 11th century. Thus, the king, according to Abul Fazl and by extension to Akbar, was not Zillallah, shadow of God, but Farre-i Zadi, the light emanating from God. He was Nur ala Nur, the light of lights. There should further be, according to Akbar and according to Abul Fazl, Sulhe Kul, absolute peace. And that was the empire which Akbar tried to establish. I'm not going into the details. I would also refer that in the past 2 or 3 decades, a number of interpretations have been offered as to the nature of the Mughal Empire. There is considerable disagreement among historians concerning the strength and competence of the Mughal state, with some describing it as a huge leviathan, others a paper tiger. These interpretations have been based principally on the Mansabdari system, which was introduced during the reign of Akbar. And for a proper understanding, all these theories, interpretations of what the Mughal state or empire was, they can be divided into two distinct groups. I would only be referring to one of those groups during the course of this lecture. Now, this first group of interpretations with which I am associated with and subscribe to is propounded by historians like M. Athar Ali, Irfan Habib, John F. Richards, and this interpretation is based on a detailed study of the administrative system of the Mughals as gleaned from the contemporary sources. I would refer you to M. Athar Ali's presidential address to the medieval Indian section of the Proceedings of the Indian History Congress in 1972, for example, or its slightly revised version entitled Towards an Interpretation of the Mughal Empire, which was published in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society in 1978. I would also refer to John F. Richards, his book, The Mughal Empire, which is in the New Cambridge History of India series published in 1993. And it was also an interpretation which was forwarded by Richards in his very famous book, Mughal Administration in Golconda, which was published way back in 1975. Now, according to Professor M. Athar Ali, Akbar's attempt to make the entire administrative structure of one Suba into the exact replica of the other, in what he says in inverted commas, I would quote him, with a chain of officers at various levels ultimately controlled by the ministers at the center, gave identity to Mughal administrative institutions irrespective of the regions where they functioned, unquote. Further, according to him, the Mansab system was, and I quote, a unique and unrivaled device for specialists, unquote. This system, however,
Sir,
according
sorry
to
for
Richard,
sir, can you hear me? Sir, sorry for the interruption. Are you changing the slide?
no,
Okay, okay. Okay, sir. I thought you are changing the slide and we can't
no,
see that.
I'll just, I'll change it afterwards.
Okay, okay, okay. Thank you. Okay,
Now,
okay. Please continue.
this system, however, according to J.F. Richards, fell short of a centrally recruited and paid bureaucratic standing army. Thus, according to this group of historians, which includes scholars like M. Athar Ali, Richards, Irfan Saab, the Mughal administrative structure was highly centralized, and this centralization is manifested in the efficient working of land revenue system, mansab, jagir, uniform coinage, etc., etc. What I argue in my presentation is that Fathpur Sikri was a physical manifestation of such an empire. Further, it marked a transition of a peripatetic Timurid ideals to a settled empire, which drew an inspiration from various regions which it comprised. Further, as we would be seeing in the slides which are to follow, that this city of stone, ordered to be built between 1571 to 1585, reflected the presiding principles of Akbar's state, the ideals of Sulh-e-Kul. So, after laying out what was the Mughal state, which was envisioned and laid out by Akbar, I would now proceed and show you some of the features which we encounter at Fathpur Sikri. Now, what I am trying to show before you is the lake of Fathpur Sikri. Now, this lake of Fathpur Sikri predates the Mughals, predates Akbar, and it was besides this lake of the present day Fathpur Sikri that the battleground of Khanna is located, where Babar and Rana Sangram Singh, contested with each other, and the place where actually Babar became the victor and became the emperor of Hindustan. Now, the Battle of Khanna took place near this very lake, and it was this lake which was used by Akbar later on to build his capital, which he called as Fathpur Sikri. Now, before we go to Akbar and the establishment of the Mughal state as envisioned by Akbar, let us for a few moments reflect on what was happening during the period of Babur. Now, before you is the slide of the famous garden which was laid out by Babur after he, roasted Rana Sangram Singh. And as a thanksgiving, he ordered the construction of a step well, digging of a step well, as well as a Chahar Bagh. The remains of that Babur's Chahar Bagh are before you. And according to the memoirs of Babur, this garden was known as Bagh-e-Fath, the victory garden. And it was this name, Bagh-e-Fath, which was invoked by Akbar in 1571 when he started founding his new capital, which, according to Abul Fazl, he named as Fatehabad, invoking the same name as that of his grandfather's garden. As I said, that along with this garden, he also laid down, constructed a step well, a bauli, which fortunately for us survives at Fathpur Sikri. Another structure which predates Akbar's capital is this, structural remains of the pavilion, which once again was, ordered to be constructed by Babur in the middle of the lake, and while sitting on which he would be compiling the pages of his Baburnama, which has been described by Babur in his Tuzuk. In fact, he tells us that one night when there was a storm, the pages which he was writing for the Baburnama, they were scattered, they were all, rain fell, and the tent which was on top of the pavilion, it fell down, and everything was floating in the, pond, and they had to be collected and dried in the sun once again. So fortunately, this structure, which predates Akbar, also survives at Fathpur Sikri. Apart from these structures of the Bawli and the garden, there are certain other structures at Fathpur Sikri which possibly date back to Babur's period itself. Even before Babur, the area where this battle of Khanna was fought, where the gardens of Fatehabad were laid out, it appears that they had been populated, inhabited during the period of the Delhi Sultanate itself. Before you are the remains of a mosque, which possibly is to be dated sometime around 50 years after the construction of the Qubbatul Islam Mosque at Delhi. Look at the pillars, which are temple pillars, which have been used to construct this particular mosque. Look at the type of the qibla, which has been built with the Khatte Kufic script, which has been used to embellish this qibla wall. And then ultimately in 1571, around 1571, at a time when one of the wives of Akbar was pregnant and was expecting, she was ordered by Akbar to be brought to Fathpur Sikri near the Khanqah of Sheikh Salim Chishti, where she was supposed to give birth to the expected child. This building, which was constructed for the expecting mother, is now known as Rang Mahal, and it is located behind the Jame Masjid, which was to be built later on. So some of these structures which are part of the Rang Mahal also survive, which date around 1570-71, just before the orders of the were given to construct the town of Fathpur Sikri. This is again one of the buildings which are related with the Khanqah of Sheikh Salim Chishti, although this structure was rebuilt, restructured during the period of Jahangir. Some of the scenes of the same structure, where, as you can see now, it has been converted into a cow shed. And although Fathpur Sikri is a World Heritage Site, but you can see how it is being maintained. Now, one of the first buildings to be constructed at Fathpur Sikri, the orders to construct that was given in 1571. And one of the structures at Fathpur Sikri, which is now known as Birbal's house, fortunately contains an epigraph in Nagari script, which gives the date in Samvat, which informs us that as per the Samvat era, what Abul Fazl was noting the orders of Akbar, that the first imperial structure was built in 1571. It is authenticated by this inscription, which is given in one of the western rooms of this structure at Fathpur Sikri, which today is known as the house of Birbal. Incidentally, it was the first imperial building where the emperor himself used to reside, which was built and came up in 1571-72. Just behind that, the other portion of the imperial structure, the Shabistan-e-Iqbal, which today is erroneously known as Jodhbai's Palace, was constructed. Now, along with the orders of the construction of the new capital being given, the pages of the Akbarnama were also illustrated. For example, this is one of the pages from the Victoria Albert Museum manuscript of the Akbarnama, where you can see the main entrance gate to the palatial complex of Fathpur Sikri, which is known as the Hathi Pole. The Mughal Empire, as envisioned by Akbar, was an empire which had symbiotic relations between the ruling class and the mercantile interests. Now, this is very much reflected in this Akbarnama page, where along the imperial route and the imperial gateway, on both sides of the imperial route and the gateway, we find shopkeepers laying out their wares. Just below the elephants, black elephants, you see two men, one in red and other in blue, selling betel leaves, pan. On the inside of the Hathi Pole, just besides the second gate at Fathpur Sikri, we find a red stone proper shop with shopkeepers sitting in the veranda with their merchandise spread before them. Incidentally, this structure was also dug out during the excavations which were undertaken by the Department of History of AMU and the Archaeological Survey of India. You can compare both the things. You see what was brought out in the excavations. You see the room and the veranda before it with the three dars, which is almost the same as the one which the painters have depicted in the Akbarnama painting. The shop. This is the Hathi pole behind which this structure is located. Now, if you look at how the city was planned, it appears that from 1571, when the orders were given, up till around 74-75, these were the buildings of the first phase which were constructed. At the top, on the north of the slide, you see the Hiran Minar, the Akash Diya. I would come to that later. Behind that is the large Sarai. As you proceed from the Sarai, on the road, you reach the Hathi Pole, below which are the waterworks, and the Hathi Pole leads you to what now are known as Birbal's, palace, and the Jodhbai Palace. In fact, what is known as Birbal's Palace, as I told, was the first imperial building palace to be made in 1571, on which we have the inscription. And just behind that, as per the Timurid traditions, the other palatial complexes were built. So, in the initial stages of the building of Fathpur Sikri, this was the alignment at the capital which was being constructed. The imperial palaces itself ultimately comprised of public, semi-public, and the private spaces, which you can see here. On the, if you can see my cursor, this isolated building is the Diwan-e-Aam, followed by the male quarters, and behind the male quarters is the semi-public area where men and women both can enter, and behind that ultimately the Shabistan-e-Iqbal or the Haram-Sada complex. This is the Dalathana area. The area which you can say as Haram-Sada. And in between both these, you have a buffer zone where you have the hospital, you have the dining rooms, offices, so on and so forth, which are constructed at a location where both male and female could enter and intermingle with each other. Apart from those three areas, at Fatehpur Sikri we have a fourth area, an area where the princess quarters were located. Now, all these things were inspired from two traditions which are of Timurid origin. One, the Chahar Bagh, the Mughal garden. We know that even during the period of Timur, the person who had founded great cities in Central Asia, but we are informed by his sources that he himself would be staying in the gardens rather than in the concrete palaces which he had built. The Timurids were peripatetic by nature and they preferred open areas and grounds, and they preferred the building of the Chahar Baghs, the four-quartered gardens. Before you is an example of such a garden, for example, later on at the Taj, or even before the Taj, from Akbar's period, at the Maqbara of Emperor Humayun, which was built during the period of Akbar himself. Or, for that matter, if you go earlier to Babur's period at Kabul, you have again a whole Chahar Bagh which lead up to the grave of Babur. That was one of the first inspirations for alignment of the various elements, urban elements of the town. The second inspiration for building a Mughal city, whether it was Fathpur Sikri, whether it was later on Shahjahanabad, or for that matter Agra, the whole idea was based on the Mughal encampment, the Mughal camp while on the move. At the front, where the Mughal camps were set, was the Akash Diya, a large pole with fire lit on the top, which would guide all those who are following the emperor. They would know where the tent of the emperor had been fixed so that they may also gather to that spot, and according to their own status and position they would erect their own tents. So Akash Diya was supposed to be the focal point of the Mughal encampment. At Fatehpur Sikri we have the Hiran Minar. Just beyond the Akash Diya was the Dalathana, the place where the emperor would interact with the public. A large tent, open tent, where the emperor would sit and would be surrounded by the nobility and the commoners both. And behind that, cordoned off by cordons all around, would be Shabistan-e-Iqbal, the Haramsara area, the tents of the women. And then all around would be the tents of various princes, Shahzadok. And then beyond the tents of the princes would be fixed the tents of the bureaucracy, the superintendents, the military commanders, officers, so on and so forth. And ultimately, on all the corners would be the bazaars. The bazaars would be placed in such a fashion that people of all categories, whether imperial or common, could approach these bazaars to fulfill their need for the goods, whether it was food grains or horseshoe, or in fact even tabibs, the medicine men, so on and so forth. This was a typical way in which a Mughal moving city was to be fixed for the night stay. And this is something which we find mentioned even by the European travelers who came to India. The same type of establishments are mentioned by them. For that matter, we have one of the Naqsha-e-Ain-e Manzil, which survives in one of the manuscripts, where you get all the details of the various types of, look at the Hiran Minar and look at the Akash Diya, which has been depicted in the various, paintings which are made of these moving tents, which are fixed at a time when the peripatetic Mughals are moving from place to place. Incidentally, the tent in which the emperor himself would be sleeping was double storied. In the ground story or ground floor would be the guards who would be guarding the emperor, and on the top would be the bed chamber of the emperor. This is how, if you look at the sketches which are there in the Ain-e-Akbari, this is a sketch from the Ain-e-Akbari itself. They are do Ashiana Manzil, double storied tent, which was reserved for the use of the emperor where he would sleep. Look at the Khwabgah, the bed chamber of Akbar in Fathpur Sikri itself. The cloth and bamboo structure has simply been transformed into red sandstone building. The same thing. Now, just like a Mughal camp, they were built in open spaces with qanats or, fortifying walls all around, and in between spaces where different types of tents were, raised at a time when the Mughal encampment was on the move. The same type of tents and temporary structures were ultimately transformed into permanent ones when in 1571-72 orders were issued to build at Fathpur Sikri. Now, one of the other towns which predates Fathpur Sikri of Akbar is the town of Agra. Now, this is a plan which is in City Palace, Jaipur, which was constructed around 1740-50 in the court of Mirza Raja Jai Singh, where you find that the entire city of Agra was situated besides the river Yamuna. Just as at Fathpur Sikri, the entire city was, faced towards the lake. I would suggest that please go through the work of Ebakosh, where she describes the city of Agra with its various gardens, which became the face of the Mughal city at Agra. At Shahjahanabad, at Delhi, the same principles were followed. Look at the alignment of the roads at 90 degrees, how they connect with the imperial palace, and beyond the imperial palace you have the river Yamuna, the same type of plan, and then the main long straight street. For example, here it is the street which emanates from the main entrance to the Delhi fort, and proceeds towards the Fathpuri Mosque, the Chandni Chowk, which is now being renovated. At Fathpur Sikri also, the same type of principles were followed, and all those Timurid and Indian influences were joined together to create a new type of a city which had not been known in India prior to the making of Fathpur Sikri. Now, the same type of open spaces with blocks of building structures in between, multi-storied but built in a way as if they are raised on bamboo poles, although everything is constructed with the help of red sandstone. Incidentally, if you go to Fathpur Sikri, you will not encounter a dome except for the domes in the mosque itself. You will find chhatris, kiosks, but as far as a dome is concerned, it is reserved only for the Jama Masjid, and nowhere else do you find the invocation of the dome. Around the imperial palace, just like in the Mughal encampment on the move, the Timurid encampment, which we have just seen, all around the imperial palatial complex were the bureaucratic offices. So we have a large number of bureaucratic offices around the palatial complex. And then all around the town, a number of well laid out chahar baghs were in fact established. In my surveys, which I carried out in 1980s and 90s, I was able to locate around 14 sites where these chahar baghs were located all around the palatial complex and all around the town itself. Now, for example, here what the artist's view of how the landscape would be looking, it would all be with various types of chahar baghs dotting the landscape at Fathpur Sikri. This is how these gardens are still surviving at Fathpur Sikri, and if you climb on the ridge and try to take photographs from the top of an aerial perspective, you would encounter a large number of garden sites which survive till date. Now, the entire town of Fathpur Sikri was divided into at least 8 quarters, which were inhabited, whereas 4 quarters were given to the lake itself. According to one of the persons who has worked at Fathpur Sikri, Satish Dawar, who was basically an architect who surveyed Fathpur Sikri during 1970s, during the period of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. In fact, she also appointed him to the upkeep of Fathpur Sikri. The entire town of Fathpur Sikri was, built around a very small pre-Akbari mosque, which he still survives, which he calls as centric mosque, which was in the, if you if you make it a point and you draw a circle around the whole city, this mosque would come exactly in the center of the planning of Fathpur Sikri, and this was what Satish Dawar in fact pointed out. And related with this centric mosque was another structure which was built by Akbar, which Satish Davar called as Pukhta Sarai, which was in fact the Chahar Souk Bazar, the four-quartered garden laid out by Akbar, which provided the alignments of the whole town of Fathpur Sikri. These are some of the photographs of that centric mosque at Fathpur Sikri, which still survives. And this is how you can see that the entire capital city of Fathpur Sikri was centered around this small, very small centric mosque, which still survives. Now, all of us know that the indigenous system, you have these 9 squares, the basis on which all the compositions in the Indic traditions are based. And this is what we find, that the same principles, remember that all the architects, those who were building the town at Fathpur Sikri or elsewhere, they were all non-Muslims. They were all those who were trained in the Indic traditions. So they invoked their own traditions plus the plan which was supplied to them, which was based on the Timurid concepts. So both these traditions were joined together to give form to the town, which came to be known ultimately as Fathpur Sikri. Sikri being the name of a small village which still survives on one side of Akbari town. Now, today, if you ignore the centric mosque which Satish Davar pointed out, and concentrate only at the palatial complex, not paying attention to the entire town, then the Akash Diya, or what we today call as the Hiran Minar, becomes the focal point. If you draw the lines, then the entire palatial complex gets aligned with the Hiran Minar at Fathpur Sikri. Look, see how on one side is the Jame Masjid, and on the other side one of the walls of the Diwane Am. All of them align very, nicely with the Hiran Minar, which becomes the focal point. Just like in the Mughal encampment, we have bazaars which are located on all the four corners. Of course, they do not resemble the four corners as you found in the Mughal encampment because of the nature of the site itself. The site of Fathpur Sikri, as all of you know, is on the top of a ridge, on one side of which is the lake. On the other hand, you have these open spaces which were cordoned off with fortification walls. Now, from one of the gates which opens towards the city of Agra, the main entrance to the city, down to Diwane Am, is a 1 kilometer very straight road, and on both sides of the road was a large bazaar, a marketplace. Incidentally, the ASI and Aligarh excavations brought to light around 400 shops which line both the sides of the Mughal road, which is laid out between the Agra fort and the Diwane Am of Fathpur Sikri. You can see another slide where these shops are in view. This is the building which Satish Davar called as Pukhta Sarai, but is actually the Chahar Souk Bazaar at Fathpur Sikri. And along with that, the residential areas were located below the ridge. In fact, it's only at one place towards the north, towards the Agra gate, where the nobles' houses were constructed on top of the ridge itself. Otherwise, most of the residential blocks were below the ridge on all the four directions. In fact, if you read Akbarnama, Abul Fazl mentions that as soon as the order was given for the construction of the first palatial complex at Fathpur Sikri, along with that, Akbar also issued orders to the nobility and the common people to start building their own residences in the areas which had been allotted to them in the town, newly emerging town of Fathpur Sikri. Some of those structures they survive. For example, here is one of the gates of a noble's house at Fathpur Sikri. Again, the ruins of the residential structure at Fathpur Sikri. A noble's house, on top of the ridge. You can see the various courtyards and the rooms which are constructed all around them. I am standing in the middle while I was surveying this in 1990s. And in the courtyards, we have been mentioning the Chahar Baghs, the Mughal gardens. So here we find that in concrete, in lime mortar, flower beds have also been created, where all type of floral gardens would have been created in the havelis of the nobility. And along with that, each of these haveli also had, these toilets and water heating devices which were, added to them. Uh, Look at how the toilets were constructed. The water heating device where the fire would be lit within the ground in the lower, ground level, and on top of that there would be, within that fire would be lit, and on top of that there would be utensils which would be heating water to be used in the toiletry of the Mughal establishments. Uh, some of the Jali works, which were, once embellished in the nobles' houses at Fathpur Sikri, now can be found in the village of Sikri and Nagar. The villagers, at a time when Fathpur Sikri declined, they took out all those stone slabs and jalis and refixed them in their own havelis, which can still be found at Fathpur Sikri, especially in the area below the palatial complex, which is known as Nagar, and the other area which is known as Sikri. All these, stone, carvings and blocks were in fact those which were robbed from the nobles' houses whose remains we had just seen. For example, here you find that within the courtyard of a noble's house, you have a fountain tank with a fountain in the middle. You can see this octagonal tank in the side below, just beside this person who's walking in the courtyard, and here fountains would be working. The gateways leading to these, havelis on the top of the ridge. And as soon as you entered into the town through any of these gateways, you had sarais, where those who were traveling to the town, especially the merchants, would be lodged for the night. One of the most important aspect of the town planning uh, at any given period of time, and especially during the 17th century, was the sources of the water supply system. And here, in this map, you can see the various sources of water which I could collect during the course of my surveys. The tanks as well as the bowlies, which are found, for example, you can count that there are 14 bowlies which survive at Fathpur Sikri, apart from a dozen or so water tanks which also survive in the present moment of time. And all these bawlis and sources of water, the main source of water was through this lake, the Golabi, which we had seen earlier as well. Today, if you go to Fatehpur Sikri, that lake is dried, and you can see the barrage of Akbar, which he had constructed to regulate the unregulated natural lake which was there when Babur had come for the Battle of Khanna. During Babur's time, it was, a natural, unregulated lake, but by Akbar's period, that had been cordoned off by a number of barrages and embankments to form a proper lake. Today, it is the wheat and other barley and other products which are being sown there. During the period of Akbar, a number of step wells, for example, here you find one, tanks were built, and then, of course, I would come to an aspect which is crucially important in order to understand the concept of an empire as far as Akbar is concerned, and that is that Akbar, following the policy of Sulhekul, was actually not following the dictates of Islam. Islam forbids the depiction, portraiture of human beings. And in the palatial complexes at Fatehpur Sikri, you find a number of portraits. I will not go into the details of these portraits, what they are, but I am just showing that although none of the Muslim kings who ruled in India ever dared to, have such images built in their own personal palaces, but Akbar, while he was making his Fatehpur Sikri, had each and every building of his embellished by such miniatures. The you can see two women, one is very hazy, but the other is a little clearer. You can see her face. And then not only the human portraiture, but also the drawing of temples and deities. For example, within the Khwabga of Akbar, you have this temple scene with a deity wearing a red dhoti and a golden crown, sitting in the Garbhagriha. On one side, you see a person whose head is surrounded with a golden halo, looking at the deity, looking at the temple. I'm not going into the details of what this scene is, but just remember that this capital of Akbar belongs to a person who came up first with a measure, a decree where he wanted to become the Imam Adil, the Mustahid of the age. But then very soon he came up with a new type of a philosophy of empire, which was known as Sulhekul. In this painting of, which is there in Chester Beatty Library from Akbarnama, you have Father Ecoava and Father Montserrat, along with a large number of, Hindu and Muslim priests sitting and discussing religion in a place which came to be known as the Ibadat Khana of Akbar. And it was a result of these, nightly discussions in the Ibadat Khana that Akbar soon visualized an empire where each and every religion was given its due. Now, this particular building is the building which I have tried to identify as the Ibadat Khana, where Akbar would be sitting and discussing with the religious classes. We have a description given by Badayuni as well as by Abul Fazl that once one of the Hindu mendicants, he was a bhikshu, Debi, came to Fathpur Sikri. Akbar wanted to meet him. So he was made to sit on a charpoy, and the charpoy was raised with the help of ropes to the jharoka where Akbar was sitting, and the whole night Devi and Akbar discussed the Hindu philosophy. And it was this Ibadat Khana where such discussions were taking place, and this is one of the jharokas of the Ibadat Khana building, which, if you go today, the guides would tell you is the Daftar Khana at Fatehpur Sikri. Yeah, this is the jharoka of the Ibadat Khana. Uh, uh, the constructions even continued even after Akbar. This is one of the buildings which was constructed during the period of Shah Jahan. This is one of the chambers underneath in the ground. I mean, you have to descend within the ground to reach this chamber with beautiful carvo intaglio designs on the dados and on the walls and ceilings. Incidentally, this subterraneous chamber, while you can see me standing there and my colleagues working, trying to note down the intricate designs, all around us were cobras, which were kept aside by other members of the team who had sticks in their hands. And beyond that gateway, which you see in front of me, was, a big ajgar, that python, which was sitting there. So today it is in a very dilapidated condition, and even the ASI is not paying any attention to that. And today, if you go there, I tried to make a plan of Shah Jahan's palace, the Dalathana of Shah Jahan, the hunting palace of Shah Jahan, which he constructed at Fatehpur Sikri. In a way, I can just conclude by saying that Fatehpur Sikri is not only a Mughal town. It is, in fact, a town which, in fact, reflects the very ideals of the empire which Akbar had thought about. Uh, Fatehpur Sikri was a town which reflected the religious traditions of each and every religion which was being practiced during the reign of Akbar. In fact, if you read the Akbarnama and Ain Akbari, you would find that in the Ain there are separate sections which are devoted to the religions and the religious communities of India, each and every one of them. All their traditions, along with their, uh, you know, uh, images, are reproduced on the walls of the palatial complex, and the entire town of Fatehpur Sikri is based on the Indic traditions as well as the Timurid inspirations. So, in a way, the town of Fatehpur Sikri is basically nothing but a reflection of Akbar's Sulhekul. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for taking the time to deliver such stimulating speech. It is indeed a great honor for us to listen to you directly. Sir, while listening to you, I was remembering your book on Fatipur Sikri Revisited, where you discussed elaborately on architectural traditions, town planning, economic centers, bazaars, residential areas, to provide a wide understanding of the Mughal world. Thank you, sir. Thank you for presenting such wonderful, this PowerPoint presentation also. Thank you, sir.
And I will just say that unfortunately, it's such a major site that 1 hour can never do justice with that.
Yes, sir.
And
Obviously.
that is why I had to pick and choose, and it actually needs 3 or 4 lectures to understand what this town of Fathpur Sikri was.
Obviously, sir.
Any questions or any?
No, sir. This is not our rules to take questions on these valedictory memorial lectures. I would like to call our পশ্চিমবঙ্গ ইতিহাস সংসদ আমাদের পশ্চিমবঙ্গ ইতিহাস সংসদের সম্পাদক আশিস কুমার দাস মহাশয়। আপনি স্যার আছেন?
আমি আছি, কিন্তু আমার মনে হয় এবার সত্যব্রত বাবুকে একটু বলতে বলে ভোট অফ থ্যাঙ্কস দিয়ে শেষ করলাম।
সত্যব্রত বাবু কি আমাদের সঙ্গে যুক্ত হয়েছে?
হয়তো ছিল।
উনি ছিলেন আমাদের সঙ্গে,
এখন কি মিস করলে দেখতে পাচ্ছি?
উনি আমাদের সঙ্গে সম্ভবত যুক্ত নেই। সত্যব্রত বাবু, আপনি কি আছেন? সত্যব্রত বাবু, সত্যব্রত চক্রবর্তী, দ্য সোসাইটি কলকাতার সহ সভাপতি। উনি ছিলেন, সম্ভবত এই মুহূর্তে উনি যুক্ত নেই। তাই আমি অনুরোধ করবো আশিস বাবু স্যার আপনাকেই, আপনি কিছু বক্তব্য প্রদান করার জন্য।
মেমোরিয়াল প্রথমে আমি ধন্যবাদ জানাই প্রফেসর অনিরুদ্ধ সাহেব বক্তৃতায় প্রাণবন্ত বক্তব্য রাখার জন্য। আপনারা যারা আমাদের আলোচনাটা শুনলেন তাদের সবাইকে ধন্যবাদ জানাই। আর ফর্মালি ভোট অফ থ্যাঙ্কসটা আমাদের সংসদের ট্রেজারার অধ্যাপক বিমান সভা।
I want to thank Professor Rejavi for his flamboyant, like always, lecture on Fathpur Sikri. I want to thank him specially because despite of his personal problems, personal very special engagements, he gave us so much time to us. Thanks, sir. Thanks once again. পশ্চিমবঙ্গ ইতিহাস সংসদের পক্ষ থেকে আমাদের অধ্যাপক অনিরুদ্ধ রায় তৃতীয় স্মারক বক্তৃতা উপস্থিত করলেন আলিগড় বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের অধ্যাপক সৈয়দ আলী নাদিম রেজাবি মহাশয়। আপনারা সকলেই ফতেপুর সিক্রি সম্বন্ধে ওনার বই নিশ্চয়ই দেখেছেন, পড়েছেন। উনি নিজে এই জায়গায় সার্ভে করে যে ডকুমেন্ট পেয়েছেন, যে বইটা লিখেছেন, তার থেকে একটু অংশ আমাদের সামনে তুলে ধরলেন। আমরা উপকৃত হলাম। ধন্যবাদ স্যার। ধন্যবাদ জানাই আমাদের এই স্মারক বক্তৃতার যুগ্ম আয়োজক এশিয়াটিক সোসাইটি কলকাতার সাধারণ সম্পাদক শ্রী সত্যব্রত চক্রবর্তী মহাশয়কে। উনি আমাদের মধ্যে উপস্থিত ছিলেন, সম্ভবত যান্ত্রিক গোলযোগের কারণে এই মুহূর্তে আমরা ওনাকে পাচ্ছি না। ধন্যবাদ স্যার। এশিয়াটিক সোসাইটির সকল কর্মী সদস্যকে ধন্যবাদ জানাই আমাদের সাথে যুগ্ম উদ্যোগে স্মারক বক্তৃতা আয়োজন করার জন্য। সংসদের সকল সদস্যকে ধন্যবাদ জানাই। ধন্যবাদ জানাই রঞ্জিত সেন মহাশয়কে, যাকে আজকে আমরা মিস করলাম, আমাদের সভাপতি। ধন্যবাদ জানাই সুস্নত দাস মহাশয়কে, আমাদের সহসভাপতি, যিনি আজকে সভাপতির দায়িত্ব পালন করলেন। ধন্যবাদ জানাই আশিস কুমার দাস মহাশয়কে, আমাদের সম্পাদক। সংসদের কর্মী অমিয় এবং খোকনদা, যারা আড়ালে থেকে সংসদকে চালিয়ে নিয়ে যান প্রত্যহ উপস্থিত থেকে, তাদের ধন্যবাদ জানাই। সংসদের সকল সদস্যকে ধন্যবাদ জানাই আমাদের সঙ্গে থাকার জন্য, সহায়তা করার জন্য। আমরা আগের স্মারক বক্তৃতাতেই আপনাদের সামনে উপস্থিত করেছিলাম যে আমরা কোভিডের পরিবেশ কাটিয়ে উঠে স্বাভাবিক ছন্দে ফেরার চেষ্টা করছি এবং ফেব্রুয়ারি 2022, 26, 27, 28 পশ্চিম মেদিনীপুরের রাজা নরেন্দ্রলাল খান উইমেন্স কলেজ, যাকে গোপ কলেজ হিসেবে আমরা চিনি, সেখানে আমরা আমাদের 37তম বার্ষিক অধিবেশন আয়োজন করতে চলেছি। আপনারা সকলেই উপস্থিত হবেন। অনলাইনে সদস্যপদ সংগ্রহ করা যাচ্ছে, আর কিছুদিনের মধ্যেই অনলাইনে আমরা আমাদের সম্মেলনের রেজিস্ট্রেশনের জন্য পোর্টাল ওপেন করে দেব। সেখানে সম্ভব 31শে ডিসেম্বর 2021 এর মধ্যে আপনাদের যারা সারাংশ ইতোমধ্যে পাঠিয়ে দিয়েছেন তাদের আর পাঠাতে হবে না, যারা নতুন করে পাঠাতে চান তারা 31শে ডিসেম্বরের মধ্যে অবশ্যই আমাদের সারাংশ পাঠিয়ে দেবেন। সমস্ত আপডেট আমাদের ওয়েবসাইট এবং আমাদের ফেসবুক পেজে আপনারা পাবেন, সেখানে দেওয়া থাকছে সবকিছু। আরেকটি বিশেষ ঘোষণা আপনাদেরকে জানিয়ে রাখি, কলকাতা আন্তর্জাতিক বইমেলা আয়োজিত হতে চলেছে জানুয়ারির শেষ দিকে। অলরেডি নোটিফিকেশন বেরিয়েছে, আপনারা দেখেছেন। পশ্চিমবঙ্গ ইতিহাস সংসদের স্টল থাকবে, আমাদের নতুন বইয়ের সম্ভার থাকবে, আপনারা সবাই আসবেন, বহুদিন পরে সামনাসামনি দেখা হবে। আর জানুয়ারি মাসের শেষ দিকে সম্ভবত তৃতীয় সপ্তাহে আমরা আপনাদের সময় এবং তারিখ জানিয়ে দেব। আমরা আয়োজন করতে চলেছি অধ্যাপক সব্যসাচী ভট্টাচার্য স্মারক বক্তৃতা 2022। এবার আমাদের বক্তা আমাদের মধ্যে থাকবেন জওহরলাল নেহরু বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের অধ্যাপক কুণাল চক্রবর্তী মহাশয়। আমরা অফলাইনেই এটা করব, কারণ উনি দিল্লি থেকে বলবেন, অনলাইনে করব, সরি। তো দেখা হবে আপনাদের সাথে আবারও স্মারক বক্তৃতায়, বইমেলায় এবং সবার শেষে আমাদের 37তম বার্ষিক অধিবেশনে। আবারও ধন্যবাদ জানাই সকল শ্রোতাকে, যারা উপস্থিত ছিলেন সকলকে, বক্তা অধ্যাপক আলী নাদিম রেজাভি মহাশয়কে। থ্যাংক ইউ নাদিম স্যার, থ্যাংকস ফর ইউর প্রেজেন্স, থ্যাংকস ফর ইউর ভ্যালুয়েবল টাইম। পশ্চিমবঙ্গ ইতিহাস সংসদের পক্ষ থেকে আজকে আমরা শেষ করছি আমাদের অধ্যাপক অনিরুদ্ধ রায় তৃতীয় স্মারক বক্তৃতা। আপনাদের সকলকে ইতিহাস সংসদের পক্ষ থেকে ধন্যবাদ জানাই। ধন্যবাদ।